Well, thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about my story. And the story really begins not so much about becoming more sustainable from a green initiative, but maybe looking at sustainability from a we perspective and actually choosing to do less in order to do something a little more significant. And so I'm going to share a little bit about my journey over the past 5 years as I engaged with something that was important to me and what it did to me by doing so. At 25, I thought I had it figured out. I was working for an ad agency. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. And but what 25-year-old really doesn't think that they have it figured out? I mean, I had a nice car, I had the job that I wanted, and I'm drinking out of a cow udder mug. I don't know why, but I think I've gotten a little bit wiser since then. My journey is going to be talking about how I thought that climbing a ladder was how climbing one ladder, I thought that was the right direction to go. And so today's conversation will be about how I was climbing a ladder, I got kicked off that ladder, and started a journey to find the right ladder for me. And it really starts with this woman here, and this is the story of Jean. In 2004, I met Jean through a local nonprofit. Jean and her son lived in an older home in an older neighborhood, and they were facing a code enforcement issue. The project was for painting, and within 15 minutes of getting to meet Jean and Todd, the project went from painting a house to several large projects, and they had been facing a code violation list that was several pages long, and they had been waiting for 6 months to try to figure out how are they going to come up with the resources, how are they going to fix it. The backstory on Jean and her son Todd. Todd had had a liver transplant 2 years prior to me meeting them. And maybe you know something about liver transplants, but I didn't. And I guess it's pretty severe. And if you survive a liver transplant, you're doing pretty good. And Jean had some medical issues of herself. And here they were, this family that has spent the last 2 years just trying to survive, spending all of their time and all of their resources going to and from medical appointments. It wasn't that they didn't care about their house, and it wasn't that they didn't just, screw it, I don't care about my house and I'll just live, and they weren't lazy. And within 15 minutes of getting to know Jean and Todd, this was the first opportunity that I really bumped up against a local social justice issue, or what I define as a social justice issue. That the best thing that the neighborhood that Jean and Todd lived in was to turn them into code enforcement. They didn't know them, and so they just look, and you drive down, and you're aware of the neighborhoods that you live in. And so you see when things are going wrong, when the grass is getting a little bit high, or in this case, the porch roof was leaking and falling down a little bit. And rather than going and knocking on the door, the neighborhood decided that the best solution was to call the authorities. But within 15 minutes, I was really faced with a decision to make. I didn't know how to do construction. So I was faced with the decision, do I stay and try to figure out how to help them? I started mowing yards, and now I decided I was going to take on a house painting project. And I didn't know how to do that. Or I could choose to walk away and say, hey, I'm so sorry about your situation, but I just can't help, and good luck. But within 15 minutes of getting to know them, I just couldn't say no. For the course of about 5 months after meeting Jean and Todd and going back weekly, and we organized and we painted a house in about in an entire day, but there's yard work and there's stuff coming up, and I'm driving across town to and from, 20 minutes from where I was at to get to their place to do odds and ends. And I just got frustrated and disappointed, and I was getting bitter by the fact that why was I having to drive across town in a perfectly good neighborhood to do things that anybody that lived next door could do? And so I wrestled with that for the next 4 or 5 months as I got to know them and began to help them. And what stirred in me was this concept of social justice, and this kind of sums up what I was feeling, that social justice includes this vision of society that is equitable and all members are physically and psychologically safe and secure. I didn't sense that. I didn't sense that for Gene, and it really, really burdened me deeply for them. So the concept of social justice wasn't new to me. Going to a Christian liberal arts school, I was exposed to big concepts, big global issues, big disparity between wealth and not. And I had the opportunity to go to South Africa. I've been across the globe to the Democratic Republic of Congo. I've seen people living on less than $1 a day, living in war-torn situations. Social justice wasn't a new concept for me, but local social justice was, and that's what was happening with Gene and Todd in our local community, and I had never really experienced that personally. What was happening at that point for me in my personal journey was I began to bump up against this idea of life purpose and what I was doing vocationally. I couldn't get enough of serving in this capacity. I wanted to desperately find a job that was going to pay me to just be generous. I wanted to work full-time and just give it all away. Somebody give me that job where I could just go and be generous. And it wasn't that the advertising wasn't a great organization or great industry for me. I love it. I still do. But at that time in life, I was bumping up against the tension of social justice issues and these folks and really the ability to do something about it. So, exactly 2 years after meeting Gene and Todd, my wife and I, my new wife at the time, and I were heading out for like a Labor Day vacation. And we're driving along, and we enter into this dialogue, and I bring it up. I said, honey, what would it look like if I were to quit my job, take an unidentified amount of time off, and just figure out what was next? Like, just leave it all behind and just not have a plan, but just try to figure it out. That's kind of a tough conversation to have when you've just been married for 2 months. Hey, honey, I love you. Here's all the good stuff, but hey, let's leave it all behind and figure out a new plan. But my wife, being full of grace and support, decided to enter into that conversation, and that was a month-long conversation for us. It was a tough conversation. Who does that? It was tough because I thought I was doing what I was made to do, but I realized that there was a little bit more that I could be doing. At the end of that month, we got to a good place, and actually, the decision was made for me. At the end of a month of processing that conversation, I was part of a downsizing movement at the ad agency that I worked with, and I got let go. It's not you, it's me. So I got let go, and that decision was made for me, but if I'm honest, I don't know that I would have done it. Or I don't know how long it would have taken me from when I made the decision or felt the pull to do something about it to when and if I would have actually done it. I've had the opportunity over the last couple of years to interact with other professionals that are finding themselves in that tension of, man, I know I should be doing something more, and I want to go out and figure out how I can do things and work in a place that I find purpose. In those conversations, I'm trying desperately to encourage them to do it. It doesn't work for everyone, especially if you have a large family and you're the sole income winner. But to pursue your time, investing in things beyond just your vocation to get at that purpose. I've learned in that time that finding your purpose, that you can find more purpose by giving your time and your talent and your resources away. Find a local organization, a nonprofit, a social cause, a neighbor that lives next to you, and just try to figure out how you can give it away and step into a journey with them instead of just more of a charitable model. At that time, I had taken 5 months off to just kind of process the journey. It forced me, getting let go forced me to actually implement the plan that I had been thinking in my head. And so I just took a number of months and just volunteered. I worked with the food bank, and I worked on some global issues with some organizations I was connected to, and I just volunteered and let the doors open if they were to open. And at that same time, there's an organization called NeighborLink who actually found the project for Gene and Todd through. And they were looking for an executive director. And I had been volunteering with them for about 3 years prior to actually meeting Gene and Todd, and at the end of that time, they were looking for an executive director and they pursued me. And after getting to know their organization a little bit more, beyond just a volunteer, I saw it as an underutilized resource in our community for meeting needs that nobody else was. NeighborLink is a faith-based nonprofit that was started in 2003. If you can, with a mission of practical neighbor-to-neighbor expressions of God's love, if you can imagine a bulletin board, an online bulletin board where needs that fall through the social service cracks in our community can go and be posted, and where individuals like you and I can go and find community problems that no one else is tackling, you've pictured NeighborLink. We are a web-based opportunity where projects come in and volunteers come and self-select projects. In 2010, we had 900 posted projects, and volunteers self-selected and organized roughly 500 of those. They chose their own path for engagement. Here's a few examples of projects that have happened in the last year or so. This was for a disabled veteran named Ken. He was renting a place for about 8 or 9 years, and the landlord switched. Somebody bought the building that he lived in and kind of pushed him out. And so some volunteers stepped in and helped him move and find a new place to live. This is a project currently going on right now. This is for Carolyn. Carolyn had a heart attack recently. She's the caretaker of a 20-year-old daughter and her kid, and also is a caretaker for her grandmother, who recently recovered from cancer. And this was her home that was in terrible shape. And so some volunteers, this group of volunteers have stepped in and are working with her, and they've invested probably well over 150 hours already just on this one project. Here was another project for a cancer survivor who roof started leaking, and she's spent the last year and a half trying to find a job. She's a technical nurse, and with her age and her medical conditions has just had a really hard time finding a job. And if you know, homes can deteriorate really quickly, and that's a very expensive project that she just wasn't going to be able to do. And so some volunteers stepped in and replaced her roof. Here's another project that you can see that the roof was gone for a long time, and this was a disabled veteran as well, who's living on $700 a month. I don't know what you live on a month. I don't live on $700 a month, and I couldn't imagine trying to survive on $700 a month. Trying to pay your house payment or rent, food, and medication. Today, seniors are choosing between food and medication every day in our community, let alone trying to figure out how they're going to get their grass mowed or fix their leaky roof. There's just not enough to go around. And there's countless seniors and those with disabilities that face this situation right here. It's not to say that code enforcement is bad, but maybe there's a breakdown in our neighborhoods and our community that says that this is the best solution for many people in our community, that we'll just enforce them and put a stake in their yard. And some people, this is the absolute right decision, but from what I've learned in the last 3 years running NeighborLink Fort Wayne is there's a large percentage of people that this isn't the right solution for. We're the right solution for our community, especially with tangible tasks like this. One of the significant key philosophies in NeighborLink is our desire to remove the barriers between the have and the have-nots. We're leveraging technology to do that in our case. We're trying to implement a social network, if you will, a web tool that eliminates the barriers for recipients to find and to ask for help. We'll take anybody that asks for help, even some of you. If you need a helping hand, post it on the website, because we want to connect somebody that wants to help to you. We're also trying to redefine volunteerism. We're trying to move away from service events and move people more towards a lifestyle of service. And by doing that, and the outcome of that is by connecting closer to home, identifying your neighborhood, redefining and rediscovering your neighborhood so you can identify the needs that are as close to home as possible, because that's sustainability. It wasn't sustainable for me to drive clear across town once a week to meet Gene and Todd. At some point, once the project started to fall off, I'm not going to drive across town as often. But if they live within a mile or walking distance, it's more likely for me to just pop in and check on them and call them and how else can I help today? In Daniel Pink's book, Drive, he talks about the three main motivators of people as autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And in NeighborLink, 100% of our projects are self-selected by our volunteers. We're just a web-based organization. Our volunteers come, select the projects, work directly with our recipients, and then we just help them with any resources or materials or finding other volunteers that may have a need. And we believe that when we give that control over to the volunteer, they're more likely going to be in a position to where if they're interested in really changing some of their lifestyle patterns, they're going to have that ability. As soon as I get involved, it becomes about me and less about our volunteers. The more that my wife and I engaged in community issues, and the more that we volunteered, and the more that we worked at our jobs and interacted with people in what we call the margins of society, the more that we were being challenged to seriously consider where we lived and how we spent our daily lives is part of our journey. And so what we did what not very many young, white, middle-class, young professionals do. We chose to move into South Central Fort Wayne. We chose to live close to community issues rather than trying to escape them. We live in by no means is our neighborhood the worst in Fort Wayne. We live in a part of town that is often written off as undesirable to live, but our little pocket neighborhood is by no means the worst part. We could have gone somewhere else, and we wrestled with that, but we did so. We moved in there with friends, and we chose community as part of choosing where to live as well. But with choices come challenges, and this has been extremely challenging for us because we are changing from the inside. We're trying to undo 25 and 30 years of being raised a certain way and trying to enter into a community. And our process and our journey has been more about our personal transformation than it has been about us transforming any part of the community. We chose to renovate a 100-year-old house. Neither one of us knew how to do that. I don't know electric, I don't know plumbing, and literally no wall was left untouched in our house. What we thought was going to be a 3-month process turned into a 10-month process and cost us twice as much to do it. One of the biggest challenges that we face daily is loving our neighbor on the left and on our right. Loving our neighbor in concept and even by faith is something that we try to really embrace, but when it comes to practically loving our neighbor here and our neighbor here that are so different from us, it's really hard to do. And so that's a huge challenge for us. How do we extend grace to our neighbors when they're different than us? Some of the other challenges that we face living where we do, we're challenged by poor performing schools. We're challenged by different shopping options. We are the cultural minority in our community. And if we truly embrace this kind of whole personal sustainability, we'd be in trouble. Increased potential for crime. With choices come wins as well. Our house turned out beautifully. We have an extremely diverse neighborhood with people that are embracing the same philosophies as us. We have more events, local and neighborhood events, than we can keep up with. Some of our friends, some of our neighbors have become some of our closest friends. We're trying community gardening and failing. It's hard. It's hard. In closing, it started with a lawnmower for me. I'm not an extremely outgoing type of person, and knocking on the doors of my neighbors isn't something that I do well at. But through NeighborLink, it allowed me to connect to people that had needs and allowed me to get to know my neighborhood better. And since then, it's caused me to choose how we live differently. I don't know how my story fits into yours. My call today is just that choosing, maybe part of personal sustainability is deciding that sustainability is about we. And as we interact with each other and we consider how to become more sustainable, that maybe it's about interacting with people as close to home as possible. And so thanks for your time, and enjoy the rest of the day.